Communiversity was part of the free university movement, part of the hippie movement. You know, one of the more interesting experiments. You know, that period. And the people who were behind the Suicide Club were also the administrators of this free university, Communiversity, which had been an adjunct of SF State. It had been an official program at San Francisco State starting in 1970. 70, I think it was 70 or 70, yeah, 70. And then Gary Warren took over as a paid student administrator, paid small stipend by SF State, probably in 73 or 4. And he and Shirley Sheffield and Kathy Hardy and a few other people were managing this free university that was taking place on, it had an office on the campus at SF State, and then they would have classes in people's homes, in classrooms, wherever. The classes were free. Anybody could lift a class. The class could be anything you wanted it to be. It could be serious or frivolous or anything. There was a lot going on with the free university movement at that time, and it's very poorly recorded. There's very little online about it now, but it was a big deal. It was in kind of a way, it was a response that the university system initially had to the student unrest at the time. They're trying to think of ways, administrators were trying to think of ways, well, how do we engage students? Well, you know, and then this free university movement came up, inspired by the free speech movement from Berkeley in '64. The first free university started in '65, including I can't remember the name of it anymore. There was a different free school at SF State University, Open University, or something I can't remember. Anyway, it started in '65 at SF State, ended, and it died in '69, and then a new one was started called Communiversity in '70. And that's the one that I was involved in later, and that's the one that the Suicide Club came out of. So anyway, this movement was a way to engage people, and I think all the different iterations of free universities around the country were probably largely took on the personality of the people who ran them to some degree. They weren't locked down, hierarchy. There was no like rule for, across the board rule that this is what you have to do to be a free university. So I think some of them were facades for political organizations. I think some were more decidedly educational in their construct and in their purview and their purpose. And some were like Communiversity. Communiversity took on to some degree the personality of the people that were administering it, Gary Warren and his friends, and they started doing weirder and weirder classes, odder and things. Gary wanted to encourage classes, and he wanted to encourage thought where people would challenge their fears, work together in a collective sense, but without losing their individuality. He believed that could be done. And I think that he specifically tried to design events so that would happen. So Communiversity was a vehicle for him to, I believe, he's dead so he can't speak for himself, but I believe it was a vehicle for him to explore his own creativity, his own fears, and in the process of doing that, encourage other people to explore their fears and to expand their creativity to levels they had no idea that they could. I think in large part so that he could be part of that. I think he wanted to encourage people to do that. Not totally out of selflessness at all, but because he wanted to grow. And he thought the best way to do that is to take a group of people, because you have a lot more power and strength when you have a group with a purpose, with a like mind. And he was very wary of standard stock collectivism at that time, stock socialist concepts, because he had been in communal political groups and found them very difficult to organize. Found the typical problems that everybody knows. Like the stupidest and loudest people tend to get way more speech time or way more influence over a collective than people who are maybe quiet and thoughtful, as you're probably aware. And so I think Gary ran into that problem a couple times. So he's trying to organize a mechanism where people could explore their creativity, challenge their fears, without getting stuck in this stodgy, collective political stupidity that was rampant.
So this is mid-70s. Of course, there is no internet, there's no email, there's no mailing list. How did he recruit the people, and what were the people doing? How would he organize the events?
Communiversity recruited or got out to different people who might be interested in it using the cutting edge technology of the period, of course, which at that time were Gestetner printers. Gestetner printer is a big thing with a big round thing on it that you put ink into and run paper through, and it prints out periodicals or whatever. and that's how they printed their Communiversity calendars, with a Gestetner printer. They were shit-ass poor, so they couldn't go and buy like $1,000 Gestetner printer, which would be the equivalent of a $10,000 Gestetner printer now. So what they did is they got one from a nonprofit company, or like a group that they knew of, and the nonprofit group had bought it secondhand from a business. So it was an old funky technical device, that they could print their calendars on, and they would have between 80 and 200 classes, and then people would just come to them, and people would do them for free. They didn't cost any money, and so they started doing odder and odder classes. Gary was really interested in exploring the urban environment, so they do midnight walks through weird places. They do visit infrastructure sites, to see what was going on there. They'd also have classes like conversational French, theoretical physics, VW repair, how to make tofu. There was just a whole range. It could be anything. Clown classes, how to do clowning. Mime class, makeup, how to do makeup. Also, at that period, it was the New Age period. It was kind of like in the second or third phase of the New Age period. So there was a lot of kind of just goofy baloney. It was kind of filtered throughout all this stuff. I mean, like little encounter group sessions, and pop psychology stuff, where people would be in group settings and discuss. Some of the stuff had some value, and some of it was probably weird come-ons for ideological groups, or even cults maybe sometimes. And Gary tried to keep that sort of thing from infusing itself into Communiversity, because there was a lot of that going about at the time. Weird groups, political and kind of quasi-religious groups, trying to recruit people at that time. Moonies, the Children of Light, all these kind of odd cults, very, very rampant at that time. So he thought, let's make a secret society that's kind of a play on a cult, and do weirder and weirder things. So he and several people, Adrian Burke, Nancy Prussia, and David Warren, they came up with this idea to start a group called the Suicide Club, which would do things that were even weirder than what they could get away with in Communiversity, because Communiversity had originally been a San Francisco State official adjunct, and after a certain period of time, SF State got so mad at what the weird class they were doing that Gary and his friends took Communiversity away from San Francisco State, made it into a nonprofit school, so they didn't have to answer to anyone, raised money to print their calendars by doing a garage sale 3 times a year, where everyone in Communiversity, there were 1,000 people on the mailing list, so it was a substantial mailing list, 1,500 people, and they would do this fundraiser where everyone would donate their used stuff, and they'd do a giant garage sale. So all the stuff for the garage sale was donated for free, and the philosophy of the garage sale was that they wouldn't charge money for the stuff. People could give whatever they wanted. So in other words, you'd have, let's say you had a nice pair of good sunglasses, Ray-Ban sunglasses that you might pay $20 for new at that time, and you'd have a pair of those there in good shape. People could pay whatever they wanted for it. They could pay 1 penny. They could pay $5. So what would happen with this philosophy, which is really interesting, this free, choose what you want to pay philosophy, is 1 out of 20 or 30 people would get a really good thing, like a record player, a stereo that might be worth a lot, and they'd give $1 for it. So they're an asshole, but nobody would say that. They'd go, okay, $1, sure, the stereo, take it. And for every one person who did that, 30 people would get like a pair of glasses that might be worth $1, and they'd give $5 for it. So through that, they always raised enough money to pay for the calendar with this Gestetner printer that spit ink on your shirt when you were trying to print 1,000 calendars. Anyway, so it was a whole process. So we'd have mailing parties where everyone would get together, and we'd mail this. We'd spend 10 people. We'd order pizza and coffee, and we'd work all night. And then, of course, later when he started getting copies. This is before copy. This is before you had mimeograph copies in stores. Okay, this is how long ago this is. So when that came along, we would do these mailing parties. We'd usually know somebody who worked at Kinko's, and we'd go to Kinko's at 3 in the morning, and we'd do it all there for really, really, really cheap. They give us a huge break, or maybe not even pay for the materials. But that's how we would print this stuff up, and how we'd get the calendars out. So Communiversity then kept going, but Gary and his friends wanted to do more and more extreme events. And so they formed a club called the Suicide Club to do that. And the first group meeting of the Suicide Club was advertised as a class okay, in the Communiversity calendar, in January, February, winter, spring calendar of Communiversity in 1977.